Everybody, and welcome to Christ Bearer Ministries. I want to thank Dr. Kent Hovind and the crew at Dinosaur Adventureland for inviting me to this theological analysis, allowing me to host. We have some links down below where you can get some of these materials at. Since this is a deep theological study, we're going to be going through this pretty fast. And again, this will be, all the links will be down below, and there's going to be a heavy discount. Some of these items will be for free, only for everyone who is on this live today. So make sure you scoop it up. It would help our ministry a lot, and we would definitely appreciate it. So thank you again, Dr. Ken Hovind. It's a complete privilege. I've seen Dr. Ken Hovind many of times. I've been over to Dinosaur Adventureland. It's an absolutely fantastic place to go. It's a place where you can just kind of unwind and be able to learn about the Lord and everything else. And Dr. Ken Hovind's a great friend of my wife, Stephanie, and I. So we really appreciate you, Dr. Kent, and everyone at Dinosaur Adventureland. Now, we're going to go through this pretty quickly. My name is Christopher Quatrine. I have graduated from Grace College and Theological Seminary with my degree in theology and my minor in human services. I've been studying scripture for about 25 years. Studied the Aramaic, studied the Hebrew, the Greek. And when I got saved in August of 1999, I wasn't a big reader, but for some odd reason, there was just this strong urge and desire to study God's word. And with that being said, and when it comes to the book of Daniel, again, we have these links. We actually have the theological analysis of Daniel, and we also have a commentary of Daniel, which is right over here beside me. Each of these, though, like the theological analysis is 106 pages, and then we got about 126 pages of the commentary. So if you guys get those both, it would help out the ministry here. And again, thank you to Dr. Kent Hovind. So what we're going to do is go down deep, stay down long, and come up dry. So here we go. We're going to start off with the structure of the book of Daniel. And the book of Daniel has 12 chapters, and it's divided into two parts. The history, which is chapters 1 through 6, and the visions, which is 7 through 12. Now, mind you, once again, guys, forgive me. This is very deep. So what I'm going to do is I'm mostly going to read from this, and I'll just add commentary here and there. So, but with the chapter, now back to here. So the chapters aren't in time order, which can be confusing, but this is how it fits chronologically. It's 1 through 6 in the chapters are historical, and 7 through 12 are the future. The order of time is that chapters 7 and 8 happen between chapters 4 and 5, and chapter 9 happens between chapters 5 and 6. And then the visions, chapters 10 through 12, are at the end of Daniel's life. The overview. So in chapter 1, right here, we're going to start here, is Daniel as a teenager of a royal lineage is taken to Babylon in the first siege around 605 BC. He and his friends stay faithful to God despite pressure to conform. Chapter 2 is Nebuchadnezzar has a dream of a statue revealing the future of Gentile empires. Daniel interprets it, showing God's control over history. Chapter 3 is the fiery furnace, and Daniel's friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, are saved by God from the fiery death from refusing to worship an idol. Chapter 4, Nebuchadnezzar himself writes about his pride, God's judgment, and his restoration after living like an animal for 7 years. Chapter 5, the fall of Babylon, Belshazzar sees the handwriting on the wall, and that's where we see the writing on the wall. And Babylonian falls to Persia in 539 BC approximately. Chapter 6, Daniel is in the lion's den. And I love this one because Kent Hovind, and this is a great term here, where he says the lion's den, where the lions may be home, but King James Version gets it right by the den of lions. The lions are home. So there is a difference between there. And thank you, Kent, for that. That has always burned into my memory now. The Magi plot against Daniel, but God saves him, showing his protection. Chapter 7 through 12, the visions of the future. Chapter 7, 4 beasts in a vision represent the future Gentile empires, ending with God's eternal kingdom. Chapter 8 focuses on Alexander the Great and his empire, showing God's foreknowledge of history. Chapter 9, the 70-week prophecy. Daniel prays. God reveals the timeline for the Messiah's coming and the end time events. Jesus points to this chapter in Matthew 24:15 as the key to understanding the future. In chapter 10, a glimpse into spiritual warfare, the angels and demons battle behind the scenes of world events. And then chapters 11 through 12 are the silent years, 400 years between the Old Testament and the New Testament are predicted in detail in chapter 11. And then chapter 12 is ending the final consummation and the second coming. And here you can go over the theological themes, God's sovereignty over history, the faithfulness in a foreign land, hope in God's future kingdom, spiritual warfare behind the scenes. All this you're going to be able to get in the theological analysis here, and you guys will be able to write some of your own notes in here. We talk about the 3 sieges of Jerusalem. Again, we won't be able to cover 106 pages in 45 minutes, but this kind of gives you an understanding of what this will all be about. And here's where we get into kind of the meat and potatoes, and this is Daniel chapter 1, and here's the introduction for it. And it's diving into Daniel chapter 1, which starts with the story of Daniel and his friends, 4 young Jewish boys taken captive to Babylon. This chapter shows us how they stayed faithful to God in a foreign land, even when it was really hard. It's set in 605 BC approximately, during the first siege of Jerusalem by King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon. And here's what we can find out about this. So the overview, chapter 1 is verses 1 through 2. You have, in the 3rd year of King Jehoiakim of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar besieged Jerusalem. God allows him to win. That's a key. That's very important here. God allows him to win. And he takes some temple treasures to Babylon in Shinar and puts them in his God's temple. And verses 3 through 7, Nebuchadnezzar orders his official Ashpenaz to select young men from Judah's royal and noble families, including Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. They are trained for 3 years to serve in the king's court, given Babylonian names, and offered the king's rich food. In verses 8 through 16, Daniel refuses the king's food because it's against God's law, likely offered to idols. He suggests a 10-day test of eating vegetables, and we'll get into that a little bit in a second, and water instead. God blesses them, and they look healthier than the others, so they're allowed to continue. In verses 17 through 21, God gives the 4 young men wisdom and skill, and Daniel understands visions and dreams. They impress Nebuchadnezzar and serve in his court, outshining all of his advisors, and Daniel serves until the time of King Cyrus, right around 539 BC approximately. So the key context is the first siege of Jerusalem. Nebuchadnezzar attacks Jerusalem, takes captives, including Daniel, and then starting the Babylonian exile. Jehoiakim, king of Judah, is defeated because God allows it as judgment for Judah's sin. Nebuchadnezzar takes treasures from God's temple to Shinar, another name for Babylon. This begins a 7-year period of captivity for Judah. Even when bad things happen, God is still in control with this. So who was Nebuchadnezzar? Nebuchadnezzar was a powerful Babylonian king who ruled for over 40 years, but his family faced challenges after his death. Nebuchadnezzar became king after his father died. During the siege, his son, evil Marduk, ruled for 2 years. And then I can't pronounce this one, Nerigilasar for 4 years, and Labesh Marduk for 2 months. And finally, Nebuchadnezzar took over, but his son Belshazzar was in charge when Babylon fell to Persia. And Daniel 5 mentions Belshazzar, and archaeology confirms his ruling at the time, proving Daniel's accuracy. So history does show us the Bible is true, even in the smallest details. So when we get a little bit into the Israel and Judah and what's the difference between those things, and the theological perspective is that God is always in control, even in hard times. And so staying faithful in a foreign culture. Daniel and his friends choose to obey God even in Babylon by refusing the king's food. The king's food was likely offered to idols, which is against God's law, according to Leviticus 19:4. Daniel purposed it in his heart not to defile himself. He suggests a 10-day test of vegetables and water, and God blessed them, and they looked healthier than all the other ones. And now some of the translations, especially in the Hebrew, doesn't actually talk about it actually being vegetables per se, but more of a grain called pulse. So like grains and seeds rather than, it kind of leans towards that rather than the vegetables. But this is generally people when they talk about a Daniel fast in Daniel chapter 1, a lot of people do start just eating vegetables because of that particular translation. So when it comes to the cultural details to understand in Babylonian times, Nebuchadnezzar wanted to turn the Jewish captives into Babylonians by training them for 3 years. And he picked the best young men, skilled and good looking, to learn Babylonian language, culture, and science. And Babylonians were advanced in astronomy, math, architecture, I almost said agricultural, but their beliefs were often tied to false gods. And here are the meanings of their names. The Babylonians changed the boys' names to erase their identity, but they stayed true to God. Their Hebrew names honored God. Daniel, his name means God is my judge. Hananiah, beloved of the Lord. Mishael is who is as God. As Azariah is, the Lord is my help. And their new Babylonians names honored false gods, which are Belteshazzar, which is the prince of Bel, where we get Beelzebub. Shadrach is illuminated by the sun god. Meshach, like the moon god. Abednego, servant of Nebo, which is linked to Lucifer. If you go down deep on that one, you'll be able to know that. Daniel's creative solutions. Daniel respectfully suggested a 10-day test to avoid defiling himself, and it worked. Daniel didn't rebel or complain. He just asked permission to eat vegetables, pulse, likely seeds or grains, and water instead of the king's food. The official was nervous because Nebuchadnezzar was harsh, and he was. But the test succeeded, and they looked healthier in that one. Daniel chapter 2 is the introduction, and we're going to get into this one, which is one of the most exciting chapters in the Bible. It's about a dream of King Nebuchadnezzar, and has only Daniel, with God's help, can tell him what it means. This dream isn't just a weird story. It's a map of the future showing how God controls history. So let's see how Daniel's faith and God's power shine through and what the dream means for us today. The overview, verses 1 through 13. In the second year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign, around 604 BC, he has a troubling dream and demands his advisors, magicians, astrologers, sorcerers, and Chaldeans, to tell him both the dream and its meaning. They can't, so he orders all the wise men, including Daniel, to be killed. 14 through 23, Daniel asks for some time, prays with his friends, and God reveals the dream to him, and Daniel praises God for wisdom and power. Verse 24, Daniel tells Arioch, the king's captain, not to kill the wise men, and goes to Nebuchadnezzar, giving all credit to God for revealing the dream. Sorry about that, guys. Get that out of there. Giving all credit to God for revealing the dream. Verse 31 through 45, Daniel describes the dream as a statue with a head of gold, silver chest and arms, bronze belly and thighs, iron legs, and feet of iron mixed with clay, which could mean a future divided kingdom, and it does. A stone cut without hands smashes the statue, and it becomes a mountain filling the earth, which is God's eternal kingdom. This dream shows the future of the world empires until Jesus returns. Verses 46 through 49, Nebuchadnezzar honors Daniel, declares God the God of gods, and makes Daniel ruler over the provinces of Babylon with his friends, overseeing the affairs. So setting the scene of Nebuchadnezzar's reign, and we already went through some of this already, but Babylonian had been a small city under Syrian control, but Nebuchadnezzar's victory made it a world power. And he ruled around the time of 605 to 562, and during the siege of Jerusalem, he learned his father died and rushed home to take the throne. And he wasn't sure if his dad's advisors were trustworthy, so he tested them with this dream. And God uses even powerful kings to fulfill his plan. The times of the Gentiles, this chapter starts with a period called the times of the Gentiles, which you see in Luke 21:24, and when non-Jewish nations rule until Jesus returns. From Nebuchadnezzar to the Antichrist, God shows Daniel the future of the Gentile non-Jewish empires. And that's why Daniel chapter 2, verse 4 to chapter 7, verse 28 is written in Aramaic, the Gentile language of the time, and not Hebrew. God's plan includes all nations, but his kingdom will ultimately win. So the statue in Nebuchadnezzar's dream shows the future of the world empires leading to God's eternal kingdom. The gold head, Babylon, 606 to around 539 BC, Nebuchadnezzar's empire. The silver chest in arms is Persia, 539 to 332 BC, which conquered Babylon and ruled for about 200 years. And then we have the bronze belly and thighs, which is Greece, 332 to 68 BC, led by Alexander the Great, who conquered Persia but died young, so his empire was split into 4 generals. The iron legs is Rome, as well as what Ken Hovind would say, the Ottoman Empire would be a good one as well. A strong suggestion, which leads to the iron and the feet of clay. And I would suggest, and I am not saying that this is dogmatic at all, but the land of Israel, they got their land back. So when you have the Ottoman Empire still in the land of Israel, when the Israelites got their land back in 1948, could possibly be why the iron doesn't mix with clay, but it doesn't explain the 10 toes, which we'll go into that later. But I believe, me personally, I think that because Israel got their land back, that's why we see clay, but yet the Ottoman Empire is still there. If you notice today, they don't get along well at all. But that, again, is my personal interpretation of it. So the iron legs, we talked about that. The feet of iron, clay, a future kingdom divided and weak, partly strong iron and partly fragile. Something it's revealing the Roman Empire at times. I also believe that it is the Ottoman Empire more than the Roman Empire, but I put that Roman Empire down because a lot of people would understand it to be that. Or it could be Roman Empire's one leg and the Ottoman Empire is another. And so, again, it's not something that should be divided among us, but just a kind of an understanding where some of the interpretations can come from on that. So the stone is Jesus, the stone that is cut without hands, who will return to destroy all earthly kingdoms and set up his kingdom forever. History follows God's plan, and Jesus will return to rule forever. And so here's some of the other ones too that are viewed by other people and different suggestions. So that way you guys know what's going on out there. The theological perspective, God reveals the future. Hang on one second. Only God knows the future, and he showed it to Daniel to help Nebuchadnezzar and us. The king's advisors couldn't tell the dream, but God revealed it to Daniel. The dream shows history from Babylon to the end times, proving God's control over everything, and that's very important. No matter what's going on, we know that God is in control, and what Ken Hovind would like to say, hey, read the book back of the book of Revelation. In the end, we win. So the king's advisors couldn't tell him. The dream shows the history from Babylon to the end times, and we know that we can trust God because he has a plan, and we will win in the end. Daniel prayed with his friends, and God answered by revealing the dream. And when Daniel heard about the death decree, he didn't panic. He prayed with his friends, and God answered that night, and Daniel praised him. Prayer was Daniel's first response, not his last resort. So pray first when you're in trouble. God listens. Give God the glory. And I love that line from Ken Hovind. Give God the glory. Daniel gave all the credit to God, not himself, for revealing the dream. When Nebuchadnezzar asked if Daniel could interpret the dream, Daniel said, not me, but there is a God in heaven who reveals secrets, in verse 28. He pointed the king to God's power and not his own. When God helps you, will you tell people about God? So God's kingdom will win. The stone in the dream is Jesus, who will destroy all earthly kingdoms and rule forever. The stone cut without hands means it's supernatural, Jesus himself. He will return to end all human kingdoms, set up his own kingdoms that lasts forever. So here's some cultural details to understand. You can kind of go through this here. The statue's metal. The metal shows a decline in value, but an increase in strength until the feet. The explanation of gold, Persia, and everything else here. So we're just going to have to move right along. So Daniel chapter 3, here's the introduction for this. And again, you guys will be able to obtain any one of these. There's a huge discount on all of these ones just for DAL and everyone that is here live. And we'll keep it up for like the next week as well. And we got some free material, again, for a thank you to everyone at DAL and the opportunity that Kent Hovind has provided me. I appreciate you, and I love you in the Lord. Thank you so much. Introduction, exploring Daniel chapter 3, which I like to call Bow or Burn. It's an exciting story about Daniel's friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who face a huge test of faith. King Nebuchadnezzar sets up the golden statue, which demands that everyone worship it. But these young men refuse. Let's see what happens when they stand up for God and what this story teaches us about trusting him even in tough times. The overview, verses 1 through 7, Nebuchadnezzar builds a giant golden statue, 60 cubits tall, which is about 90 feet, and 6 cubit wide, which is about 9 feet, in the plain of Dura, Babylon. Now, just like Kent Hovind would be an engineer, you kind of look at this 90 feet tall and 6 feet wide. This thing was probably on a platform of some sort, because that thing would probably tip over. So this would be in the plain of Dura, Babylon. He gathers all of his officials and commands everyone to bow down and worship the statue when they hear music, or they'll be thrown into the fiery furnace. Verses 8 through 12, some of Nebuchadnezzar's advisors accuse Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego of not bowing down, knowing these Jewish men won't worship idols. Verse 13 to 18, Nebuchadnezzar angrily calls the three men and gives them a second chance to bow. They refuse, saying their God can save them, but even if he doesn't, they won't worship the statue. Verses 19 through 29, furious, Nebuchadnezzar orders the furnace heated 7 times hotter, and his strongest soldiers throw 3 men in, still bound. The fire kills the soldiers, but the king sees 4 men walking in the fire, unharmed, and the 4th looks like the Son of God. But in the literal translation, it actually says like the son of the gods. But the King James version does have it right here. We know exactly what Nebuchadnezzar was talking about. In verses 26 through 30, Nebuchadnezzar calls them out, sees that they're untouched, not even smelling of smoke, and praises their God as the Most High God, and makes a decree protecting their God's name and promotes these 3 men. So the key historical and prophetic context connection to chapter 2. Chapter 3 happens after chapter 2, where Daniel is saved by the king's advisors by interpreting his dream, but now they're out for revenge. In chapter 2, Daniel reveals Nebuchadnezzar's dream of a statue. And in chapter 2, Daniel reveals Nebuchadnezzar's dream of a statue with a gold head Babylon and other metals for future empires. The king was so impressed, but his advisors were jealous because of Daniel and his friends outshined them. Now, maybe a decade later, they used Nebuchadnezzar's ego to set a trap, knowing the Jewish men won't bow down to an idol. And we give you guys some questions and things to write down in notes and everything else. And I want to thank my wife, Stephanie, who created all of these. So I appreciate you, wife. Thank you so much, Stephanie, for helping me out with this. She was an absolutely incredible help with this. These visuals are not of my own. I couldn't come up with this. Men, you need a wife. All right. So the golden statue and Nebuchadnezzar's ego. Nebuchadnezzar's statue is all gold, unlike the one shown in his dream. This shows his pride. The explanation in chapter 2, the dream statue had gold, silver, bronze, and iron, meaning other empires would follow Babylon. But this statue is all gold, as if Nebuchadnezzar saying, my kingdom will last forever. Some history tablets in the British Museum mention a revolt around 596 BC. So he might have built this to force loyalty after crushing the rebellion. Pride can lead us to make bad choices, but God is the true king. Excuse me. The typology and the picture of the end times, and we kind of go through all these. I don't want to take up too much time because we're already 23 minutes in. So where is Daniel in all this? And this is something I wanted to make mention of because Daniel is not mentioned, obviously, being thrown into the fire. So where is he? Daniel isn't mentioned in this chapter, which is a mystery. There are 3 possibilities that a lot of theologians talk about. And here's a few of them here. That did Daniel bow down to the statue? Not at all. Daniel always stayed faithful to God. Did he not bow because he avoided being accused? Unlikely, since his enemies would have loved to see him getting in trouble. Or was he away? Most likely, as a prime minister, he may have been on a trip for the king, giving the advisor a chance to target his friends instead. And you can go through some of the typology angles, the theological angles, and I'll go through this one here. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego refused to bow down the statue, even if it meant death. They knew God's law. Exodus 23-5 says not to worship idols. They told the king, our God can save us, but if he doesn't, we will not worship your gods. They trusted in God no matter what. Be brave to obey God even when it's hard or others pressure you. And I think that was something important to talk about. God is with us in trials. God sent a fourth man, which I put on your, it's obviously the angel of the Lord, Jesus Christ himself. And that's why I put maybe Jesus, because that's the only logical explanation as the Son of Man, for that's what Jesus is, into a fire to protect the three men. The furnace was so hot it killed the soldiers, but Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego walked around unharmed by the fourth man. Nebuchadnezzar called him like the Son of God, which many believe was Jesus appearing before he was born, also known as a theophany. God does get the glory in the end, no matter what. Nebuchadnezzar praises God after seeing the miracle. The fire didn't even singe a single man's hair or their clothes. Nebuchadnezzar declared, blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and made a law protecting God's name. Their face showed the king who the real God is. When we trust God, others can see his power through us. And I think that that's absolutely fabulous. God rewards faithfulness. 3 men were promoted after standing firm. Nebuchadnezzar not only spared them, but gave them higher positions in Babylon. God honored their courage. God sees when we obey him, and he will reward us now or in heaven. So some more cultural details to understand, some more typology. We get in through a lot of this. And like I said, I can't go through the whole thing, but I do need to go through at least every chapter so you guys have a better understanding. And we'll get into Daniel chapter 4, and it's diving into which I'm calling Nebuchadnezzar's big lesson in pride. This chapter is super special because it's written by King Nebuchadnezzar himself, a Gentile king writing part of the Bible. He shares how God humbled him to show who's really in charge. Let's learn how God teaches this proud king a lesson, what it means to stay humble and to trust God. The overview, verses 1-3, Nebuchadnezzar writes a letter to all the people in his empire and nations, praising the Most High God for his signs and his wonders, saying God's kingdom lasts forever. Amen, he does. Give me 1 second, guys. Verses 4-9, Nebuchadnezzar has a scary dream while resting in his palace. He calls his wise men to interpret, but they can't. Finally, Daniel, called Belteshazzar, comes to help. Verse 10-18, the king describes his dream. A huge tree grows tall, providing food, shade for all, but a watcher, an angel, orders it to be cut down, leaving the stump. The tree turns into a man who lives like a beast for 7 years, to learn that God rules over all. In verses 19-27, Daniel is shocked, but explains the dream. The tree is Nebuchadnezzar. God will humble him by making him live like an animal for 7 years until he learns God is in charge. Daniel urges the king to stop sinning and show mercy to the poor and to avoid this. In verse 28-33, a year later, Nebuchadnezzar boasts, excuse me, isn't this great Babylon I've built my power? A voice from heaven says, his kingdom is taken away, and instantly he is driven out, eating grass like an ox, with hair like eagle's feathers and nails like claws. And verses 34-37, after 7 years, Nebuchadnezzar looks to heaven, and his mind returns, and he praises God as the true king. His kingdom is restored, and he shares his lesson with the world. The key historical and prophetic context. So let's remember where we are in Daniel's story. Daniel and his friends, right? In chapter 2, Daniel interprets the dream. Chapter 3, his friends were thrown into the fiery furnace, not to bow down to the statue. And now in chapter 4, maybe 10, 20 years later, Nebuchadnezzar is still king, but needs another lesson. God keeps showing that he's in control, even over a powerful kingdom. And here's one thing to remember about Shadrach and Meshach and Abednego's story. Chapter 4 is written by Nebuchadnezzar himself like a public letter. The chapter is unique because a Gentile king wrote it in Aramaic, a language for the Gentiles, and not Hebrew. He sent this letter to everyone in his empire like posting it on a tree. It's his testimony of how God humbled him, written right around 562 BC, the year that he recovered. Even a proud king can learn to give God glory and share it with others. So the history backs up Daniel's story. The book of Daniel is one of the most proven books in the Bible. Cuneiform tablets in the British Museum show a revolt around 596 BC, which might have led to the events in chapter 3. A clay prism in the Istanbul Museum mentions names like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego as officials. An inscription from Nebuchadnezzar says, I, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, paved Procession Street with shimmering stones, grant me immortality. And you can see this once again in the Istanbul Museum. So here we have some more physical, historical evidence that these stories are absolutely real. And Nebuchadnezzar's condition. Nebuchadnezzar had a rare medical illness that's called lycanthropy or boanthropy. It's for 7 years he acted like an animal, eating grass with long hair and nails, and this is called boanthropy. Boanthropy, when someone thinks they're an ox. History records similar cases, like in 268 BC. Abanias, a Greek historian, records history in similar cases, and even in 1946, a British hospital where a man acted the same way for 5 years. God used this to humble Nebuchadnezzar, showing he can work through anything. And we got a prophetic parallel that we can go through all this here. The theological perspective. Nebuchadnezzar's pride troubled him. He boasted, I built this Babylon by my power, but God hates pride. Proverbs 16, everyone proud in heart is an abomination to the Lord. Pride makes us think we are in charge, not God. Satan fell because of this pride, if you read in Isaiah 14. And Nebuchadnezzar had to learn the hard way. And raise your hand if you ever had to learn the hard way. I had to a few times. Stay humble by remembering God is the one who gives us everything. So what is something that you're proud of, and how you can give God the credit? And God is in charge. The dream's whole point was to show that God rules over all. Explanation, the Watcher said, the Most High God rules in the kingdom of man and gives his power to whomever he will. And if you read in chapter 1, that's exactly what happened. Nebuchadnezzar was given Jerusalem was given to Nebuchadnezzar by God, if you read in chapter 1 on that. God does love to correct us if we do step out of line, but he loves us, and that's why he does. And that's replete throughout the scriptures. So cultural details to understand Babylon's greatness. Babylon was a huge, impressive city, which made Nebuchadnezzar proud. Babylon had a double wall, a moat, and the Euphrates River for water. Historian Herodotus said that the wall was 350 feet tall, 87 feet wide, with 250 watchtowers and the hanging gardens. And I have some links to these. If you guys do, once again, all the links for these studies will be down here below in the video. So we have Daniel's role as a top leader in Babylon. Nebuchadnezzar calls him the master of magicians, meaning he was in charge of all the wise men after chapter 2. So here's some the prayer of Nabonidus, a discovery at Qumran. The Dead Sea Scrolls supports chapter 4. In cave 4 at Qumran, the text called the prayer of Nabonidus was found, but the speaker thinks it's really Nebuchadnezzar. It says a king was sick for 7 years. A Jewish man, maybe Daniel, helped him, and he praised God. The names Nabonidus, NBND, and Nebuchadnezzar, NBKD, are very close, just one letter off. And this is where we kind of prepare you for chapter 5, getting into here. We're almost done here. I got to go a little bit faster. So introduction, jumping into Daniel 5, which I'm calling the handwriting on the wall. This is an exciting story where a proud king, Belshazzar, which we spoke about earlier, throws a big party but learns a hard lesson from God. We will see how Babylon falls to the Persians, how God speaks through mysterious messages, and what it means for us to honor God. So let's dive into this one. The overview of verses 1 through 4. Belshazzar, Nebuchadnezzar's grandson, throws a huge party for 1,000 lords while the Persian army approaches. He made a big mistake by using a sacred gold and silver vessels from God's temple in Jerusalem to drink wine and praise fake gods. In verses 5 through 9, suddenly a man's hand appears and writes on the wall. Belshazzar is so scared that his knees knock together. He calls his wise men to read the writing, but they cannot. Verses 10 through 12. The reason why I am smiling, because in the Aramaic, it's a great translation. We'll get into that in a little bit. It's funny what the knees knock mean. Verses 5 through 9, we talk about how his knees knock together. Verses 10 through 12, the queen mother, Nebuchadnezzar's widow, enters and tells Belshazzar about Daniel, and man with God's wisdom helped Nebuchadnezzar in the past. In verses 13 through 16, Belshazzar calls for Daniel, now an older man, and offers him gifts to interpret the writing, sacred scarlet clothes, a gold chain, and to be third ruler in the kingdom. Well, that's the reason why, because the king is out probably somewhere in Saudi Arabia, maybe. Belshazzar is number 2, and Daniel is made the third ruler of the kingdom. And that's what some interpretations would tell you about that. That's why he's called the third ruler. Verses 17 through 24, Daniel refuses the gifts and reminds Belshazzar how God humbled Nebuchadnezzar for his pride. He says Belshazzar didn't learn from that and dishonored God by using the temple vessels. Verses 25 through 28, Daniel reads, Mene, mene, tekel, upharsin, which means appointed, counted, weighted, divided, and the U and Yup right here, Yup Saracen, it means and farsin, mean divided. So God numbered Belshazzar's kingdom, weighed him, and found him wanting, and will divide his kingdom to the Medes and the Persians. Verses 29 through 31, Belshazzar honors Daniel as promised, but at night the Persians take over Babylon. Belshazzar is killed. Darius the Mede under Cyrus takes the kingdom. And again, we got some more key historicals. Who is Belshazzar? We get into a deeper dive into that and why Daniel is described. He is offered the third ruler of the kingdom, and that kind of gets into it. And again, we'll got all those links down there. God's perfect timing. Cyrus the Great. Cyrus was a special leader chosen by God. Cyrus united the Medes and the Persians, creating a huge empire from the Aegean Sea to the Indus River. He was brave but kind, freeing the Jewish captives and helping them return to Jerusalem in Ezra 1, 2, and 3. The Cyrus cylinder in the British Museum records how he entered Babylon without a battle and sent captives home. Isaiah 44, 28 through 25. One is written 150 years before the name of Cyrus. God calls him a shepherd to free his people. Excuse me. God can use anyone, even a Gentile king, to do his will. A Babylonian's future, theological perspective. All this can be read if you go and scoop that one up. Excuse me. So the mystery of Babylon in the book of Daniel before chapter 6. This is where we kind of go in. Welcome to section 6 of our Daniel study. We've gone through 1 through 5, and the last time we saw Babylon fall to the Persians. But today we're going to have a special detour and talk about the mystery of Babylon. Many people think Babylon was destroyed back then, but that's not. It's true. There's a bigger picture that's just far into the future, and we'll study that. And you can kind of go into that right here, where we kind of break it off a little bit before we get into chapter 7. So we go through all the maps, where to be located, and everything else. So we're going to get into Daniel 6 because I only don't have much left. So the introduction to the lesson. Welcome to chapter 7. And here's going to be kind of the overview of everything. Setting the scene, Babylon falls to the Persians, right? The plot against Daniel and everything else here. And we kind of go through everything verse by verse and what everything talks about here, the meanings and the context, theological perspective, faithfulness, and what Daniel had to go through and everything else. And here's some details to understand looking ahead. So we're going to get into Daniel chapter 7 and the 4 beasts. And it says, welcome to session 8, everyone. As we dive into Daniel chapter 7, a game changer in the book. Daniel's been through a lot. Deportation, fiery furnace, lions' dens. This is Daniel and his friends, but we shift now from history to prophecy. This chapter is called the most detailed prophecy of future events in the Old Testament. Jesus himself quoted it. We'll explore 4 bizarre beasts, the little horn and the son of man. So buckle up. Let's This connects directly to the end times and Revelation, which Ken Hovind, I did agree with him, obviously, agreed with him what he said this morning, that you must read the Daniel first and then get into Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and then go into Revelation. And so this will definitely be a guide for you to help get you along the way as well. So here it is, setting the scene in 553 BC during the first year of Belshazzar, Nabonidus' son, ruling as co-agent. Daniel, now around 67, has a dream vision while in bed. He writes it down, shifting to first-person narrative. The four beasts, the lions with eagles' rings, represent Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar's empire, the wings being plucked and a man's heart given to it may symbolize Nebuchadnezzar's humbling. A bear raised on one side represents the Medo-Persian Empire with its three ribs in its mouth, a conquest of this is what I'm thinking is Babylon, Egypt, and Lydia. And the raised side shows Persia's dominance over the Medes. The leopard with the four wings and the four heads represent Greece under Alexander the Great. The wings signify speed. The four heads are his generals, and here they are: Cassander, Lysimachus, Seleucus, and Ptolemy, who divide the empire after his death. The terrifying beast with iron teeth and 10 horns represents Rome, distinct from the others due to its destructive nature. The 10 horns are the 10 future kings, and the little horn, the 11th ruler, emerges, uprooting the three. The little horn, this ruler speaks blasphemies, war against the saints, and prevails them for a time and half a time, 3.5 years. He is the Antichrist and the future world leader. The Ancient of Days, the Son of Man. God, the Ancient of Days, judges from his fiery throne. The Son of Man, Jesus, receives an everlasting kingdom. Replacing the beast's dominion. The outcome, the fourth beast is destroyed by divine judgment, and other beasts lose power but persist briefly, and the saints of the Most High inherit the eternal kingdom. So the language shift in chapter 7 is in Aramaic, not Hebrew, focusing on the Gentile nations. Chapters 2 through 7 are in Aramaic, the Gentile language of Babylon, because they focus on the times of the Gentiles. From Nebuchadnezzar to the Antichrist, God cares about all the nations, not just Israel. The connection to Daniel 2, the four beasts parallel Nebuchadnezzar's statue in chapter 2. The statue's metals, gold, silver, bronze, and iron match the beasts: Babylon, the lion; Persia, bear; Greece, leopard; and Rome, the terrifying beast. Also could be the caliphate too, as well. The stone in chapter 2 is the Son of Man and his kingdom. The little horn in the Antichrist. The little horn foreshadows the Antichrist. Explanation: the little horn's traits, blasphemy, war on saints, and the 3.5-year reign match the Revelation 13's beast. He's called Mr. Big Mouth for his boastful speech, is what I said. The Antichrist will deceive many, but God will judge him. And I wrote over here a question for you guys to kind of write down so you can get more engagement into this theological study. We talk about the Son of Man, the times of the Gentiles, and the theological perspective that God controls the rise and falls of empires. Each beast's dominion is given by God. Even the Antichrist's reign is limited to 3.5 years. Trust God's plan, even when evil seems to win. The saints face persecution, and yes, we will be here for the tribulation, folks. So I always tell my wife to be mentally prepared, because we will go through the tribulation, but we will go in the end. Read the book of Revelation, read all and turn to the last page. We win, but be mentally prepared. God is in control. Have no fear whatsoever. Just lift up your heads, Jesus says, and know that your salvation is nigh. We win, people, and I will see all of you on the other side of the pearly gates. So don't worry, we win. All right, so we go through, we go through the church's unique role on this, cultural details to understand the Great Sea symbolizing humanity, and biblical imagery. The sea is often represented the nations, Revelation 17:15. The beast rising from the sea, showing Gentiles' powers emergence from humanity. Horn as the power and what's looking ahead. So a little bit, we're going to Yeah, let's go through chapter 8 real quick. We're going to do the overview and narrative. The scene is right around 551 BC in the third year of Belshazzar's reign. And like I said, 1 through 12 is not a chronological order. As I told you guys in the beginning, it kind of bounces back and forth. We talk about the ram and the two horns, the he-goat, a swift he-goat from the east. This is Alexander the Great. And then some key historical and prophetic context. Medo-Persian Empire, the ram representing the Medo-Persians. The he-goat is Greece, and then Antiochus Epiphanes, the little horn, Antiochus Epiphanes, but he foreshadows the Antichrist. We kind of see what the Antichrist will do, like Antiochus Epiphanes the fourth did. The 2,000 evenings in the mornings until this sanctuary is cleansed. This could mean the 2,306 plus or 100 or 1,150 days if evening and morning equals 1 day's offering. But again, if you guys read this, I'll give you, there's a full explanation on all this. Okay. And foreshadowing the Antichrist, Antiochus Epiphanes, the fourth typifies the future Antichrist. Gabriel says in the visions concerning the time of the end, verses 23 and 25 describe a king of fierce countenance who destroys by peace, powered by Satan, opposing the Prince of Princes, which is Christ. This matches Revelation's beast of 13:5-7. So some scholars will tell you that, no, Antiochus Epiphanes, that was what Daniel meant. No, it says right there, it says that in the time of the end, and Christ was after Antiochus Epiphanes. So this is what it's actually meaning here. So the theological perspective, we go through all that. God's protection of his people. He preserves his people through persecution. Explanation, despite Antiochus's atrocities, the Maccabees prevailed and the temple was cleansed. Similarly, the Antichrist will not ultimately triumph. Verse 25 says he is broken without hands. So some of the cultural details to understand. And what Daniel was going to, the symbolism of horns, which horns represents power and authority. The ram's two horns, Medes and Persians. The goat's one horn from Alexander, and the four horns, the generals, reflect the ancient Near Eastern symbolism of horns as strength. But the true power comes from God and not by human might. And here's something we wrote here, my wife Stephanie and I, is how has God restored something back into your life? And this is what we get looking ahead. And we're going to get into this interrupted prayer in the 70 weeks. There's a little bit of an introduction here. We go through the 70 weeks. Prophecy begins. Gabriel reveals that the 77s, the weeks of years, or 490 years, as a decree for Daniel's people, Israel, and Jerusalem to accomplish 6 divine goals: ending sin, bringing everlasting righteousness. Verse 25 specifies that from the decree to rebuild Jerusalem till Messiah, the Prince Jesus, there will be 69 weeks, 483 years. Then with the city will be rebuilt in troubled times. Again, we go through some of these. And if you guys have any questions, you can always email me, or you can go onto my Facebook and we can go through all this right here. But with the limited time that we have left, I'm going to kind of have to wrap it up here. And we'll get into part 2 is of Daniel chapter 9. The interval is 69 weeks. After 69 weeks, 7 plus 62, the Messiah is cut off, karat, which means executed or killed, but not for himself, but for us. This points to Jesus's crucifixion right around 30 to 33 AD. I'm not sure, but somewhere in between that time. I don't want to be dogmatic about any of these because I am not a prophet of God that can tell future without error. That's not me, and I'm not even going to try. There's only one God of the universe, and that job is taken. You know what I mean? So I can't give you a definitive answer at all, nor will I. We just have to wait upon the Lord. The prince is the Antichrist, not the Messiah. It's grammatically the he in verse 27 refers to the prince. In verse 26, the Roman, his people destroyed Jerusalem, suggesting he rises from a revived Roman Empire. And again, we're talking about the Ottoman Empire, and I lean heavily towards that. Destroyed Jerusalem, such as rise from the revived Roman Empire. Some scholars link him to the Eastern leg Byzantine Empire and titles it like the Assyrian in Isaiah 10 and Micah 5, indicating a Middle Eastern connection. So again, I do agree with what Ken Hovind says about the Ottoman Empire and Israel having their land back, which can represent clay. The 70 week and the covenant, the 70th week begins with the Antichrist enforcing a covenant with Israel. The 7-year period allows Israel to rebuild the temple and resume sacrifices. At the 3.5-year mark, the Antichrist breaks the covenant and halts the sacrifices and sets up the abomination of desolation. This mark, the abomination of desolation, this mark acts as the start of the Great Tribulation. The Antichrist desecrates the temple, and Jesus warns in Matthew 24:15-21, quoting Daniel, that the Great Tribulation lasts for 3.5 years, 42 months, 1,260 days, or times and half a time. The role of Israel through all this, and the rapture in the 70th week, the rapture preceding, we go through the explanation of a pre-tribulation, and I have it right here highlighted, what people say. We will go through over every tribulation view, pre, mid, post, pre-wrath. And my stance is, yes, we go through the tribulation. We are definitely going to go through the tribulation, but we are saved from the wrath of God. That is my personal position. Nevertheless, I believe that you guys should know about what other people view, but my stance is post-trib, pre-wrath on that. But I give you guys a little bit of a snippet, so that way, like when I studied in seminary, I had to study about world religions, and I believe that you guys should know a little bit about each context. But through this narrative, in my theological analysis, it's through the lens of post-tribulation, pre-wrath. Because yes, we go through it, and I have much to say about that if anyone has any questions about that. So we're going to go through this up here. We got Daniel chapter 10, where we go through all this, and I don't want to read too much through that, but we're going to skip 10 and 11, and we're going to go through part 12. And we got the silent years, and that's chapter 11, where it talks about the 400 years between the Old and New Testament periods, which is called the intertestamental period. And God does, through Daniel, give him kind of a glimpse of what the future looks like between those 400 silent years. And we got the climax of history, and then we break this down even more. Got maps and everything, and I thank you again, Stephanie, for helping me out with all of this. She helped me with maps and everything. So the consummation of God's plan. We're going to wrap this up here. The overview, chapter 12, 1-13, tribulation, deliverance, and resurrection, sealing, the vision and the timeline, and the final timeline, encouragement. Key prophetic context. You guys can read all this here if you guys get it. I'm going to go through this probably once or twice. I'll go on live on Facebook, probably around sometime during the week. And we're going to go through all of this together. And I'm going to be starting the Revelation one as well. And I'm going to be gleaning off Ken Hovind for some of this as well, because this I purchased from him, and it's a fabulous tool. It's a great roadmap and a key. So if you guys don't have this map, I highly suggest that you pick this up from drdino.com, because that is a great roadmap for this. And I appreciate that. Make sure you guys scoop this up. And again, it's a great roadmap to look into these types of things for sure. And it helped me out. It really did help me out with this whole theological analysis. And Ken Hovind, he was spot on. So congratulations, brother, on that. So we're going to go through a little bit of this here because my time is winding down. And we're going to talk about the consummation of God's plan. And this will be the final 5 minutes here. And it's an overview of the narrative and the tribulation, deliverance, and resurrection. Michael stands up to protect Israel during an unprecedented time of trouble. God's people, those written in the book, are delivered. A resurrection occurs, some to everlasting life, others to shame. Verses 4-10, sealing up the vision and the timeline. Daniel is told to seal the book until the time of the end, when knowledge of these prophecies will increase, and a man in linen swears the tribulation's duration is a time and half a times, which is 3.5 years, ending when the holy people's power is shattered, and the wise will understand, but the wicked won't. Verses 11-13, the final timeline and encouragement. From the abomination of desolations, 1,290 days pass with a blessing for those who reach 1,335. Daniel is told to go his way and rest, assured of his reward at the end. And that's the same thing with us. We are going to continue to work. We're going to continue to provide for our families, and we're just going to live our everyday lives. And that's exactly what the apostles did too. John did, Paul did, all of them did. And so when John said in the book of Revelation, a fellow brother in the tribulation, they were aware to wait for God and his coming, wait for Jesus and his coming, even during tribulation. So we see that same thing there. So wait for his coming, boys and girls. Wait for his coming, because the Bible does not teach about pre-tribulation. The key context of the Great Tribulation, an unprecedented time of trouble, targets Israel. The explanation, the times of trouble, carry forward to Jeremiah 30, verse 7, the time of Jacob's trouble. Again, thank you, Kent. Is the Great Tribulations later half, as Jesus confirms in Matthew 24 through 21. Michael's role underscores spiritual warfare, its purpose to purge Israel, and God uses trials to refine his people and trust him in suffering. The deliverance of God's people, those written in the book, are delivered. That is us. The explanation, the book is the book of life. Deliverance applies to the Jewish remnant surviving the tribulation. Not all Israel, but 2/3 perish. Assuring of salvation comes from being in Christ alone. There is a selective, resurrection and judgment. The explanation, this is likely the resurrection of the Old Testament saints and tribulation martyrs as Christ's return, not a general resurrection. And the great white throne and everlasting life and shame highlight internal destinies. Live with eternity in view, knowing your destiny hinges on Christ. The reward for the righteous. The wise who lead others to righteousness are rewarded. The wise may include the 144,000, as we see there, or faithful Jewish teachers, and during the tribulation, their reward, shining like stars, echoes eternal glory in Matthew 13:43. Sharing the gospel, ladies and gentlemen, sharing the gospel yields eternal rewards. So the sealing of the book, and this is the final 2 minutes here. Sealing the book and increasing knowledge in verse 4. Daniel's prophecies are sealed up until the end times, until the book of Revelation. Then it's preached there, and it's no longer sealed in the book of Revelation. Unlike Revelation, which is unsealed, Revelation 22:10. Daniel's book is preserved for a time of the end. The knowledge that increases refers to the understanding of these prophecies, not just general knowledge as seen in recent insights. For example, Gog as a demon and the Septuagint, and going through all the different types of languages. Expect greater clarity on prophecy as the end approaches. The tribulation's duration, 1,260 days. The times and half of times, 3.5 years, 1,260 days, matches other passages such as Daniel 7:25, Revelation 13. The additional 30 days or 45 days may involve a post-tribulation events like judgment or maybe the kingdom establishment, though this remains speculative. No one has a definitive answer. Some people do try to put their interpretation onto it. I personally don't, because I am not God, nor am I the Lord Jesus Christ. Only God himself knows that one. The theological perspective is God's faithfulness in times of tribulation and in tribulation. God delivers his people through trials. Despite the tribulation severity, deliverance is assured. This fulfills the promises like Isaiah 14:1-2 and Jeremiah 30:7. God's faithfulness sustains us during tribulations. And I want to thank each and every single one of you guys. I'm sorry that was a lot on the plate, but I want to thank Kent Hovind. I want to thank Joseph for your correspondence, for your help, and guiding me through this live. I want to bless each and every single one of you. And I pray that the Lord Jesus Christ protects you and preserves you in Jesus' name. Thank you.